This is how the fate of pyruvate looks like under anaerobic condition. But I want to emphasize it's not only because of lack of oxygen that pyruvate will undergo conversion to lactic acid. In fact, some cells, you see, glycolytic pathway is also referred as ubiquitous. Ubiquitous means it happen in most or all organism that is found in the world, okay, or in Earth. Uh, Very few actually do not do glycolytic pathway. So it is a ubiquitous pathway, and also when it is present in the cell, it has to be always on. Uh, so the problem is these NAD plus as well as FAD are very low concentration in our cell. So when they become NADH, if all NAD become NADH, there will be a situation lacking of NAD plus. And if it's lacking, it can come to a situation where glycolysis cease uh, to be completed. That means it stops. And if it stops, then the cell may die. So in order for the glycolytic is always on, what the cell does, it purposely, even though there is a lot of oxygen, it purposely goes forward in order to generate this NAD plus. Therefore, the concentration of NAD plus is sustained, and therefore this glycolytic pathway will be always on, and it will not be stopping at any instance. So that's the purpose. In terms of anaerobic, it is conversion of glucose to pyruvate and then to become lactic acid or lactate. And from pyruvate to lactate require another enzyme, that is lactate dehydrogenase. So this is considered like the 11th step. The enzyme is lactate dehydrogenase. So this slide basically is already strengthening what I already explained, that it will generate the fermentation or anaerobic glycolytic pathway will generate lactic acid, which is partly oxidized glucose, and the lactic acid is still rich in energy, however cannot be tapped into. So here given the summary in terms of fermentation, but I do not encourage to use fermentation for human body, or in that case animal body as well. Why? Because fermentation is normally conducted by microbes. So the best term is glycolytic or anaerobic glycolytic pathway, whereby the glucose will be converted to lactic acid or lactate in active skeletal muscle. But by microbe, it will be glucose converted to ethanol, done by microbes such as yeast. And this is where the industry of alcohol fermentation takes place, where beer and liquor is made by using glucose or macromolecules of carbohydrate is slowly digested and reacted upon by microbes. So this slide has a little bit something that you need to understand, either with me explaining, or you may have to go and get more information to understand better in terms of the number of ATP. So you have two glycolytic types of pathway being compared here. One is anaerobic, the other one is aerobic glycolysis. So you have, in terms of net energy that is being obtained to be 2 for anaerobic, while for the aerobic will be either 6 or 8 ATPs. That's where things will become very complicated. You may want to ask, why is it 6 or 8? So from glucose up to pyruvate, the cell will obtain 6 or 8. So listen carefully. In terms of ATP produced, both are same. It will be 4 ATPs, both aerobic as well as anaerobic. And I also have put where the location of the steps for these both types of glycolysis. The only difference is for aerobic, apart from the 4 ATPs as well as the 2 ATPs, also given the steps, additionally there is 2 NADH that is only found for the aerobic glycolytic pathway. The anaerobic, because when pyruvate become lactic acid, 2 NADH will be utilized, therefore it loses the 2 NADH. But in terms of aerobic glycolysis, the 2 NADH is still in existence. And since the location of glycolysis is taking place in the cytoplasma, the 2 NADH need to go into the mitochondria because that's where electron transport chain is. The thing is, for the 2 NADH to go into mitochondria, there are 2 types of channel. The active transport as well as passive transport that you learned in previous lecture. So here's the thing. The 2 NADH can either go passively, therefore no ATP is wasted, or it can go through actively, and if it goes through actively, for each NADH, 1 ATP will be lost. And then when it reaches the mitochondria, it will undergo electron transport chain, where it will produce for each NADH 3 ATP. Of course, if you look at some biochemistry book, the actual or accurate number of ATP will be written there as for each NADH 2.5 ATP. But in terms of biochemistry lecture that I give, we'll just consider as 3 ATP. Otherwise, if I refer it as 2.5. Okay, so you have the NADH going through electron transport chain, you get 3 ATPs. Okay, so what happens in the aerobic glycolysis? If it goes through the channel passively, therefore you have 2 NADH giving rise to each one 3 ATP. So 2 times 3, 6 ATPs in the electron transport chain. Then you don't forget about the 2 net ATP. So 6 plus 2, 8 ATPs. So if the NADH goes through passively, you will get 8 ATPs, and that's been shown here. However, if the 2 NADH goes through by actively, loss of 2 ATP takes place. Therefore, that's why you get 6 ATPs. Okay, so sometimes at university level, you will realize you cannot rely on the lecturer to understand certain things. I will try my very best, but if you still do not understand after of me explaining for 5 minutes in this slide, it is highly recommended that you go and get a book or even watch YouTubes on glycolytic pathway, or go and find internet accessible website on glycolytic pathway. So in terms of glycolytic pathway, citric acid cycle, electron transport chain, I'm not so worried for some of you because in the pre-U studies such as uh, STPM or HSC, also in terms of diploma, although we have lost most of the diploma entry students because they got exempted. Also, I think matriculation would have must have learned this basic metabolic pathway. Only those other pathways you may not been given the exposure. Eh? So now we come to this slide. We look at the differences between aerobic as well as anaerobic glycolysis. So you have, again here, you may experience some confusion, especially the fate of lactic acid. Okay? So you have the end product for aerobic to be pyruvate. You already know that, but pyruvate doesn't stop uh, after becoming pyruvate. It just doesn't stop. It carries on into the mitochondria, goes through citric acid cycle, and must go through electron transport chain until become carbon dioxide and water. Okay, but in terms of anaerobic, lactic acid or lactate cannot, when things are okay, it cannot from lactic acid become pyruvate. In fact, I just want to refresh your memory. In some biology courses that you have done, you know, when you are running, it will form lactic acid, and this lactic acid build up in the muscle will cause pain to your muscle, and that's why you tend to stop and start breathing heavily to take oxygen, because there is oxygen depths that you need to provide in order to convert lactate not to pyruvate, but lactate need to be mobilized or taken out from the muscle into the bloodstream, sent all the way to the liver, and that's where lactic acid or lactate will be converted to pyruvate and enter another pathway, that is gluconeogenesis. I already told you in the overview of biochemistry, sometimes it's very confusing because you learn about a pathway that you have not come across in some other pathway that's been presented to you. So here you realize that lactic acid will be sent to the liver, and in the liver gluconeogenesis will take place. Okay, so that's the fate of lactate. It can never become pyruvate in the muscle cell itself, but need to be mobilized to the liver. Okay, and then in terms of energy production, it says here aerobic 6 or 8, but in actual sense, it doesn't stop at pyruvate, right? So the total number of ATP after glucose become carbon dioxide water is in fact 36 or 38 ATPs, and that has been referred in terms of what happens to pyruvate. It goes into citric acid cycle, then you get 30 ATP, so 30 plus 6 or 30 plus 8, so 36 or 38 ATP in total. Okay, then also been referred here the regeneration of NAD plus. So once you become NADH, where do you get it to become NAD plus? For aerobic, it says here through electron transport chain in mitochondria, but in terms of anaerobic, when pyruvate become lactic acid, you actually from NADH you get NAD plus. So hope you can recall that. Okay, and then lastly, in terms of availability of lactic acid, you cannot use it back in the muscle cell to become pyruvate and then continue to citric acid cycle. No, in the myocyte or even in the red blood cell, lactate that is made need to be sent to the liver. I worry it's a bit complicated, but this is what you can read in a biochemistry book or any other sources on what's happening or differences between aerobic as well as anaerobic glycolysis. So we now come to this slide. This is an interesting slide because so far we have already covered this part here, that is utilization of carbohydrate in the form of glucose. I'm sure based on your pre-U understanding, you have food, could be in the form of carbohydrate, lipid, protein, meat, rice, fish oil, or fat from poultry, fat from goats. So all you eat, and then it gets digested in your digestive tract by the action of enzymes found in your stomach, in your small intestinal tract, even in the mouth cavity. Eventually, the macromolecules, that is fat, carbohydrate, will end up as their monomers, either in the form of glucose for carbohydrate, for fats to be triglyceride, to then broken into fatty acid as well as glycerol, for amino acid, or rather protein, to become amino acid due to digestion done by trypsin, pepsin, all these. All these monomers, fatty acid, glucose, amino acid, they then diffuse into the bloodstream, where then they travel to cells, could also be back to liver, and then become fuel energy cells that can be then broken down to carbon dioxide and water, for instance, for glucose. So we already look into this glucose to become pyruvate. Remember that. That is glycolysis, either to form pyruvate or to form lactic acid when there is lack of oxygen. Pyruvate will then go into mitochondria and then become acetyl coenzyme, and then to Krebs cycle, cyclic pathway, and then all the NADH, FADH2 into electron transport chain to form lots of ATP. Total number of ATPs generated in this manner from one glucose molecule will be 36 or 38 ATP. Okay? So that's on carbohydrate, but it doesn't stop on glucose. You also have fructose, galactose, mannose. They also come in some steps of the glycolytic pathway to eventually go through this until electron transport chain. If you don't have carbohydrate freely available, you can also tap into fat, that is in the form of triglyceride, bring it to muscle cell or in the liver, and then break it down to fatty acid and glycerol. Glycerol can enter this way until electron transport chain, but not much of energy attained from glycerol. Or fatty acid, double the energy that you can form from fatty acid compared to carbohydrate, whereby in the presence of oxygen, it can go into mitochondria and then make ATP. And in extreme circumstances, such as extreme starvation, or in normal circumstances, you can also utilize protein. Okay? Proteins will be broken down to amino acids, and depending on which amino acid, you got 20 amino acids, they then remove the amino group. Unfortunately, amino group cannot be utilized for energy, So their presence in the cell can be toxic. Eventually, by urea cycle, they can become urea and thrown out of the body. The other portion, that is the carbon backbone, all carbon, will then enter depending on which type of amino acid from the 20. They can enter at various locations of these major metabolic or catabolic pathways as shown here. So that's overview in terms of utilizing carbohydrate in the form of glucose, fat in the form of fatty acid, protein in the form of amino acid. So moving on, we learn about these considered special features of glycolysis. However, this slide is a slide that used in teaching medical student. So they still have the presence of facts relevant to medical student rather than biotech student such as you. But I still want to go through it. So you have red blood cell or hemoglobin or erythrocyte, which has hemoglobin inside. Unfortunately, the mature red blood cell does not have mitochondria. When they form, they will have mitochondria nucleus, but when they become mature, they lose this mitochondria, meaning that they cannot do citric acid cycle because citric acid cycle is found in mitochondria as well as electron transport chain. So since these two pathways cannot be done, it only rely on glycolytic pathway. That means glucose will end up as pyruvate, and then instead of being acetyl coenzyme A, it will form lactic acid. So it stops at lactic acid. But if lactic acid is building up in erythrocyte or red blood cell, it could end up destroying the red blood cell. So that's where the red blood cell will release the lactic acid, and the lactic acid will be taken by liver and then converted back to glucose. So that's one of the features. Next thing about red blood cell is the glucose can be taken by red blood cell without the need of the hormone insulin. Myocyte or muscle cell require the need of insulin to trigger the glucose channel, but this one no need because red blood cell is very important. It constantly need the supply of glucose. Similarly, brain cells also do not rely on insulin, so they are independent. And then the special feature, one more special feature, which is very much medical facts, is about methionine hemoglobin. In our body, got various type of hemoglobin, but this one is not the good hemoglobin, and it always need to be put into around 1% compared to the good hemoglobin that should be in ample or majority should be the normal hemoglobin. This methionine hemoglobin, it's if the normal hemoglobin, this methionine hemoglobin should be Fe3 plus. So it needs to be converted to Fe2 plus with the presence of NADH. So NADH will reduce the Fe3 plus to become Fe2 plus. Therefore, the percentage of hemoglobin in the form of methionine hemoglobin is always kept at around 1%. If it goes more than 1%, as you can see from this YouTube video that I already put here, it will cause the hemoglobin, because this methionine hemoglobin is not very good in releasing oxygen. Therefore, until the person can become blue in physical feature, if this methionine hemoglobin raises alarming level in the body. So here given all the important function of glycolysis. Firstly, you can generate energy, ATP, either in the anaerobic or aerobic. If it's anaerobic, it's only 2 ATP, net ATP of 2. don't even have NADH. However, it is quite rapid because very few steps. Therefore, can make a lot more ATP rapidly compared to aerobic glycolysis, which require longer duration. Okay, so the aerobic glycolysis will give rise to up to pyruvate 6 to 8 ATP, up to carbon dioxide to water 36 to 38 ATPs. And then another medical facts. I'm not going to assess you just for knowing. Okay, the tissue have this 2,3-bis phosphoglycerate. If you look at the metabolic pathway, there is the intermediate 1,3-bis phosphoglycerate. If you go back and look, okay, you see in the high altitude climate, or a guy who goes out to Mount Everest, as you go to higher altitude, uh, less oxygen is present there. So for the person who's hiking a mountain, what happens as he goes higher and higher, the 1,3-bis phosphoglycerate will be converted to 2,3-bis phosphoglycerate, whereby this intermediate will cause the red blood cell, the hemoglobin in the red blood cell, to release oxygen as most as possible. Okay, so this intermediate is like a safety net for anyone going up in high altitude to get more oxygen. So this 2,3-bis phosphate will cause less affinity towards oxygen in the hemoglobin. And then the third facts, you see the glycolytic pathway is overall classified to be catabolic pathway, but it also has anabolic features. Anabolic pathway means it can from small become bigger product. So you have the intermediates such as within this pathway dihydroxyacetone phosphate, you have 3-phosphoglycerate, you have also pyruvate, which can be going into other pathways, getting connected to other pathways to become other products. For instance, dihydroxyacetone phosphate can be converted to glycerol 3-phosphate, which is a precursor in making fatty acid and consequently triacylglycerol as well as phospholipid. Okay? Then you have the 3-phosphoglycerate as well as pyruvate can then be made into amino acids. For instance, serine, and then pyruvate as well can become amino acids. Okay, and lastly, the fourth facts just strengthens what has been referred in the first fact, that glucose will become pyruvate, and then it doesn't stop there. It'll become acetyl coenzyme A, citric acid cycle, electron transport chain to provide lots of ATP. This is an interesting YouTube video I put here. It's about hypoxia, where this gentleman here was brought in a plane at a high altitude, and he's not given the oxygen mask. And then they tested him. Quite interestingly, he cannot do an exercise which a 5-year-old kid could have done. Because of hypoxia, meaning buildup of carbon dioxide and low concentration of oxygen because of high altitude, the brain may end up dying, and therefore, or causing certain complication for the normal function of brain. That's what's been shown. But the individual or the gentleman, once been given oxygen mask or brought to lower altitude, he has restored his IQ altogether, no problem. So here you can consider as a summary, where the economics of biological energy that is due to glycolysis has been summarized, where you will realize at the end of it, you can generate 2 NADH if it's aerobic, net of 2 ATP in the end because of 2 ATP used at the stage 1 and then 4 obtained in stage 2. So 4 minus 2, 2 net ATP. Then you also have 2 NADH. Of course, anaerobic glycolysis, you don't have the 2 NADH. So it's just to give some summary on the end result of ATP. This on the specific tissue in terms of glycolysis, what happens there. So the red blood cell or erythrocyte, it will rely entirely for ATP because it goes through anaerobic. So net of 2 ATP, also build up of lactic acid, but it can be removed by sending it to the liver. Later we will learn that sending it to the liver means using Cori cycle. Then you have skeletal muscle where it relies either anaerobic or aerobic. Especially at high intensity exercise, it will go to anaerobic. So it will generate less ATP but rapidly. Then you have adipose tissue as well as liver. Due to the intermediates of glycolytic pathway, you will form glyceryl 3-phosphate, become fats, triglyceride. You also have acetyl coenzyme A that eventually can become fatty acid and then triglyceride. So same thing with liver. So just like any other lecture, I end with some kind of student activity. So this also comes with this called self-assessment. You will see the answer will be either aerobic glycolytic pathway or anaerobic glycolytic pathway. It's about, the first task is about a 20-year-old male Malaysian athlete experiencing muscle fatigue. Muscle fatigue is because of the buildup of lactic acid. So when they say name the muscle biochemical that contributes ATP during this intensive muscle training exercise. So when you are exerting yourself in the gym or you're doing intensive training, it's definitely has gone to anaerobic glycolysis. So that's been referred there. Then describe anaerobic glycolysis during muscle exercise. So you basically you should know that glucose through 10 step to pyruvate, then to lactic acid. Describe the role of the liver during intensive muscle training exercise in preventing muscle fatigue. So liver is where through the Cori cycle all the lactic acid form in the erythrocyte. Also the muscle cell will be brought, and then there gluconeogenesis will convert it back to glucose, but not in the muscle cell. Describe the preferred glucose metabolism in athlete's red blood cell which is devoid of mitochondria. So red blood cell or erythrocyte do not have mitochondria, so naturally it has to be anaerobic glycolysis. Then you have the second activity, heart exclusively aerobic, has no glycogen stores in the heart attack or coronary blockage. This is also very medical, but just for your knowledge, what happens is in the heart, it has lactate dehydrogenase, one type of lactate dehydrogenase. So this has a tendency in the muscle. You have the isoenzyme lactate dehydrogenase, which normally converts pyruvate to lactic acid. But in the muscle, you cannot convert pyruvate to lactic acid because then it will destroy the muscle of the heart, and that's a very important tissue. If that get destroyed, then you will get heart attack. So in the isoenzyme of lactate dehydrogenase in the muscle works opposite direction, where it takes the lactic acid become pyruvate. So what's the role of the heart lactate dehydrogenase? And that's the role where it prevents heart attack because it keeps on changing the lactic acid to pyruvate. Okay, so that's it in terms of this lecture. You can go through it in the form of video as well as in the form of slides, which is found in Kalam.